cruise missiles. Belgian Parliament decided in the 80s they didn't want any of these cruise missiles, American nuclear missiles, travelling around their countryside and hiding in their woods because it made them a target. And they didn't want to be used by the Americans as a sort of place to roll around these nuclear weapons. So they said, no, we're not having the cruise missiles in Belgium. Within about a month and a half, these attacks started happening. A new group appeared, which was called Axion Direct. It was a big star, and these posters would appear around some of the main streets in Brussels and other places in Belgium. And these supermarket attacks then convinced the Parliament and the public that there were Russian groups within Belgium, far-left groups, that were doing these attacks and that were attacking the state. So this galvanised the Belgian Parliament. Immediately, they said, yes, we do need cruise missiles. So they changed their decision as soon as these attacks had happened. Now, Hugh O'Shaughnessy, writing in The Observer, had spoken to some lads from the SAS. Afterwards, these lads, just confidentially to him, confessed to being part of that attack. Their Belgian forces were used as reconnaissance forces. The Belgian special forces went in and they looked at the supermarket when people left, when they arrived, as ostensibly as a training exercise. And then they found afterwards that the reconnaissance they'd done on the supermarkets, there was suddenly an attack on the supermarkets afterwards. The attacks were actually done by the SAS. And there was something like 8 or 9 people were shot dead, about 25 people were injured, and only the idea was that these supermarkets were attacked to raise money for this organisation, Axion Direct. But of course it didn't exist. The only real attempt was to get the Belgians on side with American foreign policy.
It's what you call false flag operation.
Yeah, essentially they were pretending to be someone else, and they even found the guns that were used in the attack. They'd been put in dropped into the bottom of a canal with the money. Afterwards. This is what the Belgian inquiry found out. So we can see that the idea of special forces can be used not only as a way of attacking the enemy, as they were very successfully in the Second World War, particularly in North Africa, places like that, but they can be used against your own people. And what was a crucial part of this is that at no time were the actual same special forces from that country used in that country. What NATO would do is they bring special forces from another part of Europe to actually do the operation. So that's just one example from Belgium. Italy was a far bigger campaign. There was lots and lots of bomb attacks by this group, the Red Brigades. If you ever hear or read about the Red Brigades, you have to understand these were fermented inside the universities and then totally co-opted by the intelligence services to use against the government. Now, the intelligence services being against the idea of communists, a communist party forming part of the government in Italy, the kidnapping and assassination, murder of Aldo Moro, all these were attributed to the Red Brigades. Now, many of those attacks, if not all of those attacks, were actually run by NATO from Brussels. So this is pretty shocking stuff. The whole thing has been documented very well not only by Alan Frankovich in his incredible film. I would say anybody interested in this subject must sit and watch it. I've made sure I was banging on for about a year about, can anyone find this film? This is back in the about 2003, 2004. Eventually, suddenly a copy appeared on the internet. It had been recorded, I think, at Falmouth Art College. The BBC didn't want to give anyone access to it. So it's a 3-part documentary all about Operation Gladio, right from the end of the Second World War with the involvement of James Jesus Angleton, recruiting Nazis and recruiting fascists in Italy into the US intelligence networks, and how these networks then became very, really, I suppose, occupied by the far right.
What was the name of the film?
It's called Operation Gladio,
Okay.
and it's Time Watch, part of the Time Watch strand. 3 films.
Was there any link with what you were describing in Italy with the P2?
Well, he talks about all this in the film and the book. Absolutely, yes. P2. You can Google it or whatever. Yeah, you can get it on the internet, I think. Yep. I sell it on the net as well as a DVD. But it's so important, I think, to understand the importance of this operation. because you can see that many of the attacks which were blamed on far-left groups were nothing to do with these. I mean, what would happen was the people who had joined the Red Brigades would go, good God, that wasn't us that did that, but somebody did, and they were very unsure as to whether they should support it or not. Anyway, if you have a look at that, you'll find a lot of material there. But Bologna railway station bombing, 93 people were killed. The bomb was put in a second-class railway waiting room. And many ordinary people were killed. Now, this is not the sort of thing you'd expect from a left-wing group, maybe in the first-class waiting room. But anyway, there are all sorts of other circumstances which become much clearer when you realise that these bombs were being put down by the far right, not by the far left, but to scare the population and the political classes and bounce them into making pro-US decisions.
Sometimes when it's the ordinary populace that are attacked, that this is sometimes an indication that it's a government-backed or establishment.
I would totally agree.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I find all the time with all these attacks, the hierarchy never victims. Yes, the hierarchy never. They don't blow up banks, do they?
Many of them, absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the way the IRA campaign went, they started off with involving innocent people in bomb attacks, but then they ended up with attacking the City of London. And the only people that got killed were idiotic photographers that decided to run past the police cordon. Anyway.
Is there a sonic ball thing going on?
I don't know about that. Okay, so anyway, that's Operation Gladio, which is absolutely crucial to, I think, to understanding the world we're living in today. And the film is really good. It starts off with this guy on a railway station saying, well, we were told this was the most secret operation that we would ever be involved in, and we weren't to breathe a word of it to anybody. Now, of course, you can understand if this is what they're doing, killing innocent, ordinary people in their own country, then they won't be wanting to told about it. Well, the reconnaissance and things like that were done by domestic special forces. And this is the whole compartmentalisation. What you do is you get these guys to do a little reconnaissance exercise that they're then told, oh, you've done very well, that's the end of the story. And then you bring in special forces from outside to conduct the operation itself.
There was a famous German general called Gladio who said, if you frighten the people and scare them enough, you can do just what the hell you like.
Well, as Naomi Klein has picked up Guderian's words, really, hasn't she? Okay, so let's move on to just talk briefly about the Irish Troubles, because this is really important. I lived myself in Ireland, in Fermanagh, for about a year, and decided, because I was reading news bulletins which were talking about Ireland with all these various different political factions and groups, I was thinking, good God, who are these guys? What do they do? So I spent quite a long time over there getting to know ordinary Irish people and hearing from the bottom up, I suppose, their story of what caused the Irish Troubles. Now, one of the things we can be absolutely sure of, because of the investigation into the collusion between the loyalist paramilitaries and the British Army, is that there are some really bad eggs. The Force Research Group was involved actively in supplying explosives and bomb material to the loyalists, and the Dublin and Moynihan bombings were... it's now been shown beyond any doubt that these explosive devices were obtained from the British military. The IRA, it seemed, could make bombs, but the loyalists weren't very good at that. They were very good at getting angry, and so they needed a bit of help. And it seems to me absolutely outrageous that the British Army should be out there helping in either side of the paramilitaries. The guy who's behind it is absolutely official now because of the investigation done by Lord Stevens. Do you know about the Lord Stevens inquiry? Halfway through his inquiry, his office in a police station in Northern Ireland was blown up. A massive fire and a bomb in his office. But he stood the next day, he said, I thought this might happen, so I kept copies of everything in my other office over in Britain. Yeah. Anyway, so very smart guy, Lord Stevens.
He's a very brave man.
Yeah. And I think it's also there's one name I really must mention, and that is Brigadier Gordon Kerr. Brigadier Gordon Kerr was one of the key people in the Force Research Unit who was actually himself handing explosives to, and he was masterminding a lot of the collusion between the British Army and the Loyalists in order to keep things going. Now, you may or may not know, the SAS was sent out, and there's several books that allude